So I'd like to talk to you about meals and how we could use meals and how we can use our homes to invite our friends in where they can hear the gospel, the good news about Jesus Christ. And my experience over the years is that it's a lot easier to get your neighbours and friends to a meal in your home than it is to invite them to a rally or an evangelistic service. So I'm a great believer in the home as a place for this kind of outreach. And you've only got to think of the Gospels, and Jesus did so much of his evangelism, of his telling the stories about the kingdom of God around meal tables. Think of Levi or Matthew and how they brought all their friends in for a meal or a dinner party. So what I'm going to do is try and describe to you what it would look like and how it feels one of these evenings. They usually have 4 elements to them, and the first element is what I call the welcome. Now, the key thing is you want it to be fun. It must, as the people arrive, they must feel, gosh, this is going to be really good fun. So you need to have music and just a great atmosphere. I remember once talking to a chap who ran a great restaurant in Vancouver, and it was probably the best restaurant in Vancouver. And I said, what's the secret? And he said, Roger, you need to assault the senses. So it needs to be visually exciting, orally in our ears, and the smell and the taste of the food. So as people arrive, you want them to sort of, their spirits to soar, and they think, this is going to be a great evening. It mustn't feel religious or, cringy or anything like that. I usually go on the dictum, if you want one person to come, you probably need to invite 3. I usually find I have to invite 3 to get 1. So if you want a group of 10 to come to your home, you might have to invite 25 or 30 people. And one evangelist who I used to work with a lot, called Canon, he used to say, it's not a failure if you invite people and they don't come. It's only a failure if you don't invite them. So have the food ready as soon as they come. Give them something to drink. I find most people need something to have in their hands so they relax. I don't normally have grace. I think that's a bit religious if you're inviting your friends and neighbours who aren't Christians. Be creative with the food. You could have a Thai evening or a Chinese or an Indian or anything you want. I've been to so many pizzas, Italian, French. Really, it's up to you. You can make it as creative as you want. And it's also good that when you give the invitation to say to people, come for a meal at our home, and there will be the opportunity to discuss the meaning of life. That's open, it's not too specific. And then people know that they're coming to something with a discussion afterwards. And I think it's also very important that you pray for each person who you've invited. So that's the first bit, the welcome. Secondly, that leads into the opening or the talk. So don't let the meal go on too long. Usually I suggest about an hour. And then you need to get everybody into a circle so that you can see everybody. Eye contact's very important, so they can see you, you can see them. And it's good. I usually have 2 talks. One of about 5 minutes on the meaning of life. What is the meaning of life? Raise some questions in people's mind. And then I often like to have a testimony where I'll introduce a friend and they will share a little bit about how Jesus has changed their life. Something about transformation. And it's usually best, I find, if you're giving the talk, not to have notes. It needs to be very relaxed. And I also find it's very helpful if you've got somebody coming in from outside. It's usually best to have an outside speaker, and we can provide outside speakers for you. So that's the opening part, the talk. Then that leads into the third part of the evening, which is the discussion. And you need to move from the talk into the discussion. Now, I usually find it's helpful to say something like, before you give the talk, there will be a discussion, an opportunity for a discussion afterwards. We usually need 2 or 3 questions, so you might like to be thinking of a question that you could ask. And sometimes I say, and there will probably be 20-second silence, because there nearly is always 20-second silence. Then you voiced it, and it's not so embarrassing. then draw the questions out from the group. I usually write them down on a piece of card, so I've got kind of like an agenda for the evening. And I often say, if there are people a little bit shy or reticent, that's okay, we'll move on to dessert or coffee or whatever's following. You don't have to ask a question, then they relax and then they usually ask the question. So you need to just be a little bit sensitive about that. And I usually find that part of the evening probably to last about half an hour. It's much better if the discussion's going really well and you finish it when it's really exciting. It mustn't be boring or embarrassing, basically. And you must avoid confrontation. So if somebody asks me a question like, well, I find this idea of there being a God of love when there's so much suffering, I can't believe in that. I would say, well, thank you, that's a great question. Why did you ask that? Get them to speak a bit more, and then throw it into the middle. What do others think? So you want the centre of the discussion to be in the middle of the room. And that leads on to the final part of the evening, which is the personal discussions, and you need to have something to move from the general discussion into the personal discussion. Now, I normally either have dessert or you can have coffee, and it's best to put the coffee or the dessert somewhere else in the room. So everybody has to get up to go and get their coffee or their dessert, and that breaks the group up, which then enables everybody to chat on a one-to-one basis. And I find that people then are often very open. They want to perhaps talk about personal issues, which they wouldn't talk about in the group, but they will feel free to do that on a one-on-one. And it's also very important after these meals, these suppers or teas or dinners or whatever we have, to have something to invite them onto. So I usually invite them onto a guest service at the church on the Sunday. And my experience over the years, and I've done hundreds and hundreds of these, is that often the people become Christians at the service on the Sunday. They come to a supper and they talk about these sorts of issues and they discuss them in an atmosphere of love and trust. We always say that no question is too simple and no question is too hostile, so that anybody can ask anything. So you need to have something to invite them to afterwards, kind of daisy chaining. And I often like to have copies of Why Jesus by Nicky Gumbel, or the little booklet Knowing God Personally, or 2 Ways to Live, something that I can give people if they're interested. Now, wouldn't it be great if we had lots and lots of these suppers or dinners or meals on every street corner or in a block of flats? Just think of the numbers of people we could reach. So I'd like to challenge you to think about and pray about, could you host one of these? Could you invite your neighbours in? It might be good to just do a dummy run and invite them in for supper anyway, so that when we get to the mission and the outreach later on in the year, we've already had them all over for a meal first. Thank you.